My mother gave my most valuable watch to my cousin when I was away on a business trip. He sold it for a gaming computer, and she pretended like nothing had happened. I've been fascinated by watches for as long as I can remember. When I was a kid, my dad had this one watch, a polished steel beauty that he wore everywhere, whether he was fixing something around the house or heading to a formal dinner. He'd let me hold it occasionally, showing me how the hands swept gracefully across the dial. "Time is the most precious thing we have," he told me once, and somehow, that stuck. As I grew older, I didn't just admire the watch, I became obsessed with everything about timepieces. I'd pore over articles about their inner mechanisms, learning how gears, springs, and escapements work together like a perfectly choreographed dance. While my classmates traded sports cards or obsessed over video games, I was captivated by the intricate artistry of horology. My parents, though, were very much do-it-yourself types. They believed in earning everything you wanted. I remember when I begged for a new bike as a teenager, my mom didn't just hand me cash, she handed me a rake and a list of neighbors who needed their leaves cleared. "Work for it," she said. I spent weeks on that project and eventually got my bike, but more importantly, I learned the value of effort. That mentality shaped how I approached every goal in my life, including my love for watches. By the time I got to college, I decided to buy my first real watch. It wasn't expensive, just a sturdy, no-frills piece that cost a few $100s, but I had saved for it by tutoring calculus and working part-time in the library. That watch became my pride and joy, not because of its monetary value, but because it represented something tangible, my hard work. It felt like an achievement I could carry on my wrist. Over the years, I slowly built a small collection. Each watch in it marked a milestone, the promotion that took years of late nights to earn, the marathon I trained 6 months to finish, or even just a spontaneous splurge after a rough year. Watches became my way of celebrating progress, and each one had a story tied to it. But none of them were quite like the one I bought after landing the biggest promotion of my career. This watch was the pinnacle of my collection, a piece I'd dreamed about for years but hadn't dared to buy until I felt I'd truly earned it. It was a mechanical chronograph, a fusion of precision and artistry. Its polished steel case was sleek and timeless, while the open-heart dial revealed a glimpse of the intricate gears inside, a mesmerizing display of craftsmanship in motion. The leather strap was supple yet sturdy, fitting snugly on my wrist as though it had been made for me. What set this watch apart wasn't just its design but what it represented. I'd recently earned a promotion that I'd worked toward for years, a milestone that felt like validation after countless late nights and uphill battles. This watch was my way of marking that achievement, a reward for perseverance, grit, and believing in myself when it wasn't always easy. When I finally fastened it to my wrist, it felt like I was wearing a symbol of everything I'd overcome. At home, the watch had its own dedicated space. I placed it on a handcrafted wooden stand in my office, tilted just so to catch the first rays of morning sunlight. The light played across the steel surface, making it gleam in a way that seemed alive. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, I'd sit with a cup of coffee and watch the gears move in perfect synchrony, a calming reminder that effort and precision could create something extraordinary. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed excessive or indulgent. Friends who noticed it would ask, "Why spend so much on a watch?" But for me, it wasn't just about telling time. It was about holding a piece of craftsmanship that mirrored my values, discipline, resilience, and a commitment to excellence. This watch was more than a timepiece. It was part of my story, a story I hope to pass down one day, just like my dad had with his own cherished watch. It was late spring when I got the call about an opportunity that could define my career. My company was pursuing a massive client, and I was chosen to lead the pitch. It was the kind of assignment that demanded focus, preparation, and travel. The project would take me across the country for a week, an intense but exciting prospect. I packed my suitcase with the essentials, tailored suits, crisp shirts, and my favorite cufflinks. As I stood in my office, deciding which watch to take, my hand hovered over the stand where my prized watch sat. Normally, it would have been a no-brainer. I wore it for anything important, but this time, something gave me pause. The thought of losing it during the chaos of airports, taxis, and hotel rooms gnawed at me. It felt safer at home, where it could remain untouched. Mom's going to be here anyway, I thought. She'd offered to house sit while I was away, watering my plants and keeping an eye on things. My mom had always been reliable in that mom kind of way, pragmatic, dependable, and occasionally overbearing. I'd come back to a house that was not only spotless but probably reorganized with helpful efficiency. I locked the watch cabinet, giving it a reassuring pat, and left for the airport. Looking back, I should have trusted my instincts and taken it with me. But at the time, I thought, what could possibly go wrong? If you knew my family, you'd know how the stage for disaster was already set. My mom's relationship with her older sister, my Aunt Carol, had always been complicated. Aunt Carol had a way of making everything about her bigger house, her high-achieving kids, and her so-called grace in navigating life. Every holiday or family gathering turned into a subtle competition that only Carol seemed to be playing, and my mom would always bend over backward to avoid conflict. It was like she was still trying to prove herself to her older sister, decades later. Enter Tommy, my cousin and Aunt Carol's youngest. Tommy was the golden child in the worst possible sense, lazy, entitled, and perpetually sheltered by his doting mother. He was in his early 20s, perpetually between jobs, yet somehow always had the latest gadgets. Carol's explanation was always the same. He's just young, still figuring things out. That excuse had been worn out years ago, but no one dared to question it, least of all my mom. Mom had a soft spot for Tommy. She defended him at every turn, insisting that he just needs a little guidance. Or, he's not as bad as people think. I'd stopped arguing with her about it long ago. But I couldn't ignore the way Tommy seemed to float through life without consequences, while everyone else worked to stay afloat. Looking back, I can't say I was blindsided by what happened. The signs were all there: my mom's eagerness to help, her inability to say no, and Tommy's bottomless appetite for instant gratification. But I never thought they would collide in such a devastating way, especially not while I was thousands of miles away. When I returned from my business trip, the first thing I noticed was that something felt off. The house was pristine, just as I expected, but the energy was different. Maybe it was the silence, or the way my mom avoided eye contact when I walked through the door. She greeted me cheerily, but there was an edge to her tone, a forced brightness that made my stomach tighten. I went to my office, where my prized watch stood proudly on its wooden stand, or at least, where it should have been. The stand was empty. My heart sank, and I froze, staring at the void where the watch had been. At first, I thought maybe my mom had moved it while cleaning. That wouldn't have been unusual. She loved rearranging things for better flow. Mom? I called, keeping my voice steady. Did you move my watch? Oh, that old thing? She replied casually, popping her head around the corner. My chest tightened. I gave it to Tommy for his birthday. He needed something nice. The words didn't register at first. I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she just said. You what? I asked, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. Well, she said, suddenly defensive. You never wear it, and Tommy's been having such a hard time lately. It's not like you're going to miss it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My most valuable possession, the watch I'd saved for, worked for, cherished, was gone. And for what? So my cousin could play dress-up in something he couldn't possibly appreciate? My head spun with anger, disbelief, and the sharp sting of betrayal. What was he going to do with a watch like that? I demanded. Oh, he sold it, my mom said, waving a hand dismissively. He needed the money for a gaming computer. I stared at her, dumbfounded. She said it so matter-of-factly, as if it was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. He sold it? Are you kidding me? My voice cracked, and I realized my hands were trembling. It's just a watch, she said, her tone dismissive. You have so many of them. I didn't think you'd mind. I couldn't respond. It was like the floor had been ripped out from under me. The watch wasn't just an accessory. It was a symbol of years of effort and achievement, something I'd hoped to pass down one day. And now, thanks to my mom's blind loyalty to Tommy, it was gone. The rest of the evening felt like a haze. I couldn't stay in the house. The walls seemed to close in on me every time I thought about the empty spot on my desk. I drove aimlessly for an hour, the anger and disbelief bubbling under the surface as I replayed everything my mom had said. The weight of it all, her casual dismissal, the sheer thoughtlessness of her actions, hit harder with every passing minute. It wasn't just about the watch. It was about trust, boundaries, and respect. The watch had been something I'd poured years of effort and meaning into, a part of my life story. Now, it was gone, traded away in the blink of an eye because my mom thought she was doing something kind. When I finally returned home, the house was dark, and my mom had retreated to her room. I wasn't ready to face her again, not after the day I'd had. Instead, I sat in my office, staring at the empty stand where the watch had always been. The silence felt oppressive, broken only by the faint ticking of another watch in my collection. But no matter how much I tried to focus on anything else, my eyes kept drifting back to that empty spot. I wanted to call Tommy and demand answers, but deep down, I knew he wasn't the real villain here. He had no way of knowing the watch wasn't hers to give. To him, it must have seemed like an extravagant, but heartfelt birthday gift. And now, it was too late. The watch was gone, its story erased, reduced to the price someone was willing to pay at a pawn shop. The thought of confronting my mom again made my stomach churn. Would she ever truly understand what she'd taken from me? Or would this always be another one of her "you're being dramatic" moments, filed away as one of my overreactions? I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how much the watch had meant to me. It wasn't just about the monetary value or even the craftsmanship. It was about the journey. Every time I wore it, I was reminded of the long hours, the challenges, and the triumphs that led to buying it. It was a piece of myself, a tangible reminder of everything I'd worked for. And now, because of one careless decision, it was gone. By morning, the anger had hardened into something quieter, colder. I couldn't let it go, but I also couldn't let it consume me. One way or another, I had to find closure, not just for the watch, but for the betrayal that came with its loss. The morning after, I decided to approach the situation calmly. Anger wasn't going to bring back the watch, and the last thing I wanted was to escalate a misunderstanding into a full-blown family conflict. After some thought, I called Aunt Carol. She answered cheerfully, as always. "Well, if it isn't my favorite nephew! How are you?" I took a steadying breath. "I'm okay, Aunt Carol. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about the gift Mom gave Tommy for his birthday." "Oh, the watch?" she said brightly. "Wasn't that a generous gesture? Tommy was so excited. It was such a thoughtful gift from your mom." "Yes," I said carefully. "But there's something I need to clarify. The watch wasn't actually my mom's to give. It was mine." There was a pause on the line. "Oh dear," she said finally, her voice tinged with worry. "I didn't realize." "It's okay," I reassured her. "I know Tommy didn't mean any harm. I just want to explain why the watch was important to me. It was something I saved up for over a long time, and it represented a lot of hard work and personal milestones. So when I found out it was gone, it really hit me." "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry," she said. "I had no idea it was so meaningful to you." "I know," I said, keeping my tone measured. "I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but I'd like to ask a favor. I know Tommy sold the watch to fund his computer. If there's any money left over after the purchase, I'd really appreciate having that back. It's not about the money itself, it's just about making things right." Aunt Carol didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said. "I'll talk to Tommy, and we'll figure out how much is left. He didn't spend all of it yet. He was planning to upgrade some parts later. I'll make sure you get whatever's remaining." "Thank you," I said, relieved. "I really appreciate it." The conversation ended on a positive note, and true to her word, Aunt Carol called back a few days later to tell me she'd spoken to Tommy. He was apologetic and handed over what was left from the sale. It wasn't much, but it was enough to feel like a gesture of goodwill. As for my mom, she seemed relieved that I hadn't turned the situation into a confrontation. She apologized in her own way, though I could tell she didn't fully understand the depth of what the watch had meant to me. I decided to let it go. Sometimes it's better to accept what's done and move forward. With the money I received, I didn't try to replace the watch. It wasn't something that could truly be replaced. Instead, I put it towards something else that mattered to me, something that would serve as a new marker of my journey. The watch may have been lost, but I took comfort in knowing that my approach had preserved the relationships that mattered. Family is complicated, and while not everyone sees the world the same way, I learned that honesty and understanding can go a long way toward keeping things intact.